Hi, everyone. Today we will continue to go through Gary Allen Fine's book, Kitchens. And in doing so, we're looking at the continuation of American social thought threads that we've talked about before. Overall, we can look at Fine as trying to look at social organization through a social psychological lens, kind of connecting what's going on with individuals, what's going on that personal level, to what's going on socially speaking and the relationship between the two. So, as I mentioned before, you see a lot of Goffman here with respect to individuals encountering social structures and trying to negotiate those social structures with their agency. As a general type of theory, we can say that Fine presents readers a theory of social organization. Specifically, he's trying to explain how social order is created in restaurants. And to explain the creation of social order, again, we're looking at that interplay between what's going on the personal level, our thoughts, our actions, and what's going on socially, and how the personal and social come together to establish overall functionality. In other words, to establish an overall social order within restaurants. And as I mentioned, although Fine is looking at four different restaurants and the similarities among the four restaurants when it comes to promoting social order, we can apply this theory of social organization to other environments as well, to other forms of work, to other organizations such as sport teams. But even if you look at a classroom, how a classroom is created in terms of order, the same principles can be applied. So that's what we're looking at. And he begins to kind of explain how order is created in restaurants by looking at how people have to manage different obstacles in restaurant work. And when you're successful at this obstacle management, then the work can be successful. You can have order, you can have punctuality at the restaurant, and the restaurant can survive, it can succeed. But if you're not successful at the obstacle management, then the restaurant is going to be in jeopardy in terms of its overall survival, its ability to be successful. So just a few different dynamics we talked about last presentation, how you have to kind of navigate issues of time. So if you're spending too much time on preparing something or getting food out to a table, then that's going to back everything else up. The more food is going to be kind of backed up, or the more people are going to be waiting for their food. So you need to find ways to save time when time is an issue, and you can plan ahead. You can work with other people in time saving kind of mechanisms. So, it's just different ways you try to find ways to save time. And when you can save time, your restaurant is more likely to be successful. Another obstacle you have to manage is space. So, often in physical spaces, there needs to be a certain type of upkeep to them because customers not only want their food in a timely manner, want to be served in a timely manner, but they expect the space, at least the space they can see, to be clean. So you really need to focus on the cleanliness of the physical environment to keep customers coming in, to get customers to come back. So one strategy to kind of keep up the appearances is that you focus on cleaning only what the customers can see, what we can call kind of the front stage of the restaurant. And then you can let a little bit of dirtiness slide by you in the back spaces of the restaurant where people really don't get to see what's going on. And then finally, we looked at how people sometimes can be obstacles. So you want to create harmony among coworkers, and we'll talk about this later on in this presentation today. But you could talk about different strategies that are used. Sometimes cooks will make extra food or perhaps put some food aside for the servers, for the runners or dishwashers, just as kind of a way to say that you're appreciated, just as a sign of a recognition. And doing that kind of helps people do their jobs. And sometimes, you don't like washing the dishes. Sometimes you don't like doing all the running around. But when, you get some food at the end of the day, when somebody gives you kind of a free meal or a free dessert, then you appreciate that, and that kind of builds the harmony among coworkers. So all those dynamics, we'll look at kind of directly and indirectly in this presentation, as well as our next presentation when we wrap up the book. Now we can turn our attention to the readings for today, and I'll break it up into two parts. We'll be looking at how order is created in kitchens, in restaurants, and how order is maintained by navigating potential barriers, by navigating potential tension. And then we'll talk about how a interpersonal practice of play, different forms of play, come together to create a work culture that motivates people to navigate tension, to think of the we instead of the me, thus again making restaurants more orderly, building that social organization that's needed for a restaurant to succeed. So when we're looking at order in the kitchen, we can say that there are three forms of order that all coexist individually, but all kind of work together as a whole to produce functionality. And for this to occur, we can recognize the potential barriers, the potential tensions within each type of order. So looking at the three orders, we can say there's a physical order in restaurants, and the physical order is more about kind of the space itself, socially. Can people fit, back in the kitchen? Is there enough room for people to do what they need to do to get things done? And also in terms of the physical order, we can look at the equipment that's used. And so the potential tension here, again, there's more forms of tension that could potentially emerge, but I'll focus on a couple different potential tensions for each order. So in terms of the physical order, sometimes a space is tight, and then there's too many people kind of crammed in a certain area, that can lead to problems. People run into one another, people getting upset, people dropping things, and people simply not being able to do what they need to do, whether it be the cooking, whether it be the cleaning, or the running. So what you start to see to navigate space issues, sometimes you can limit who can actually be in a certain space. And so we can say that, if you're a server, we appreciate you, we love you to death, but you have to stay out of the kitchen because there's not enough room for you back here. And, sometimes you don't have to do that for the whole day, but maybe at certain times when the crowds are heavier, when the workflow is much faster, at those certain times, lunch, perhaps later dinner times, you can limit who's back there. So, during the slower times of the day, feel free to come back and hang out and chat. But when things start to get a little bit busy, then we need to make sure that you guys stay in your space so we can get our work back, our work in the kitchen done in our space. So there's a way you kind of navigate the tension where rather than have people running into one another, you make sure that people are kind of in a proper space at proper times so the tension isn't created to begin with. When it comes to equipment issues, more often than not, nobody is kind of happy with the equipment. There's always something better you could be using. There's always kind of a newer piece of technology and that perhaps he could be using. So Fine talks about often, the cooks are never 100% pleased with their equipment, but to kind of, navigate this potential tension, this barrier that, the equipment's not up to their personal standards. Personally, I like to have something different. But what happens here is a compromise. So, rather than throwing a fit, rather than making a big deal out of an issue, the cooks, the workers will compromise with their provided tools. Yes, ideally, perhaps I would have a different type of stove. Perhaps, ideally, the oven would work differently. But, I'll kind of work with what I have to work with. Rather than making a big deal out of it, you compromise, you navigate any tension, and also sometimes you can bring in your own equipment. So if you don't like, the knife you're provided, you can bring in your own knife. It's hard to bring in your own stove or something like that, but again, the idea is to navigate any potential tension. You simply have to compromise. And when you can bring your own equipment, you can do that as well. So now we can look at, in addition to the physical order that's needed for the restaurant to work smoothly, we can look at the social order. And with the social order, we're looking at the different roles and responsibilities attached to those roles that workers find themselves in. So, one potential tension can be, one potential barrier, that the workers are simply not performing their responsibilities. So, whether it be the servers, the cooks, the chefs, the pantry workers, the dishwashers, everybody has different responsibilities attached to their roles. And when you're not performing your duties, then that's going to impact other people in terms of them not being able to perform their duties. In other words, the potential tension is if one person's not doing the duty, then the other person can't perform their responsibilities as well. So if the chef, for example, doesn't create the menu for the weekend, then the cooks don't know what to cook. If the cooks are cooking too slow, then the servers, can't get to the food out to the customers in a timely manner. And so again, so on and so on. Everybody needs to do their roles. You need to be washing your dishes effectively in terms of getting them clean. You need to wash them efficiently in terms of getting them out quickly as possible. So again, no matter kind of how high or low you are in the chain of command, everybody needs to perform their role properly for the kitchen to function properly as a whole. And so, navigating that tension, basically, as a worker, you start to perform your duties for the team, for the collective, rather than for yourself. Because what you find often is, in a lot of service work, you may not be happy with the pay you're receiving. So often the wages are low wages. Often the work, of a dishwasher, of a server doesn't come with, too much status. So, you're not really doing it for the glory. You're not really doing it for the money because it lacks the money, it lacks the glory. So, why do you do it? You do it for the team. You do it for the restaurant as a whole. It's not all about me, it's about we. So that's a way you kind of navigate people not doing what they need to be doing, is you have to get them to think about it's not about you, it's about kind of us as a whole. And then also you can look at how sometimes it's difficult to perform your duties successfully because you're overwhelmed. There's a lot going on, especially at those peak hours of the day. And so, to navigate this potential tension when people are overwhelmed, you can do a couple things. You can allow them to vent. So, it's going to happen. People will get upset. That tension will emerge. Although you try your best to avoid it, the tension will sometimes come to the surface. And so, what you do is, sometimes you let people vent. Let them kind of get it out of their system in a, productive way. You don't want somebody to have a breakdown, in the middle of where, everybody's eating. But if somebody wants to get something off their chest, you make the time and you provide the space for that to happen. And sometimes you kind of bite your tongue, you grin and bear. Although you may want to say something to the cook or you may want to say something to the server, you kind of keep it to yourself. It's kind of recognizing that the situation is bigger than yourself. You're not really mad at the person; you're more mad about the situation. So in those ways, again, you kind of avoid the tension of boiling over when you kind of let people vent sometimes, or you just kind of keep your issues to yourself. And then often what you find is when people are overwhelmed, people will lend a hand. They'll help each other out. And so here's where you actually step outside of your duties. You step outside of your responsibilities. So yes, you may be a dishwasher, but you may help out somebody with the pantry work. Or you may be a server, but you may help out with some dishes, some glassware, kind of getting where the dishes and glassware needs to be. So again, you're not formally tied to those duties, but you're doing it to help out your coworkers and kind of navigate any potential tension that could emerge when people are overwhelmed. So finally, we can look at the symbolic order. So in addition to the physical, the social orders within the restaurant, within the kitchen, we can look at symbolic orders. And this is about kind of the overall social recognition and respect amongst workers. So the tension can be potentially that people don't respect the chain of command. And when that respect is lacking, then here often people won't help each other out, or people won't, take orders. When you don't respect the person above you, then you're not going to maybe listen to them seriously. And when you don't respect the people below you, perhaps you wouldn't help them out when they need to be helped out, when they are overwhelmed. So there's the potential tension when people are not really respecting the chain of command. And to navigate this, you can punish people, for not listening to the higher aboves and for not respecting the chain of command. And then also, to kind of navigate the tension, you basically want to, show people that, you get respect with time. So you may not get it right away, but after being at a place of work for a month or two, then that respect will be earned rather than given to you. So, maybe the cook is not going to help out the dishwasher right away, but that help will come, as soon as the dishwasher kind of earns the respect of the cook. And again, that comes with time and that comes with some work ethic. And so, another issue, another tension that could emerge within the symbolic realm is that when that respect is not earned. So you show up on day one and you believe everybody's to jump when you ask them to jump. You kind of are entitled that everybody should be doing things the way you want to do it. So when you're not earning the respect, that can boil over into potential tension and barriers that can be dysfunctional. But basically, again, what you need to do is earn that respect. So to navigate this tension, you earn the respect through your hard work and through respecting others as well. So when that respect and the following of the chain command is there, and when everybody's performing the roles and responsibilities, and when everybody's kind of dealing with their equipment issues and dealing with space issues properly, the three orders can come together. And when the three orders are functioning properly together, the restaurant, the kitchen as a whole can be functional. So at this point, we could ask ourselves, is fine being overly romantic perhaps, and in the sense that he says that we're always trying to help people out, we're always trying to navigate those barriers, we're always trying to avoid those tensions from emerging. So Fine says, people just don't do that to do it out of benevolence. But basically, Fine says, within the restaurant, a culture is created, and it's this cohesive culture that brings people together, that forms bonds among coworkers. It's this work culture that motivates people to navigate the tensions. So it motivates people to help each other out, to bite their tongue perhaps when they want to say something that's perhaps not so nice. And it helps people just, look after one another and have each other's backs so the restaurant can be successful, can be functional. So basically, this promotion of navigating tension in the kitchen rather than promoting tension itself among coworkers, it starts with building a work culture. And this work culture is produced through interpersonal practices, basically play. So pranking one another, joking around with your coworkers, socializing during, sometimes outside of work, using different nicknames, having your own kind of slang and language that you use at work that perhaps other people don't know what you mean when you use the slang. And so the role of play, the role of these interpersonal practices, basically helps build and sustain a cohesive work culture. So the culture doesn't simply exist, the culture doesn't build itself. The culture is created when the coworkers are kind of interacting with one another in this kind of fun way of play. So I think it's kind of interesting here how a lot of the times at work, or perhaps if you're on a sport team or even in the classroom, where the teacher or the coach or the boss will say, hey, stop horsing around, hey, stop playing around. Sometimes that horsing around, sometimes that playing around is actually good for the organization. It helps the students come together in a classroom. It helps the team bond with one another, and it helps the coworkers come together and have each other's back. So, although you don't want to play too much where nobody's getting any work done, a lot of this play, a lot of the interpersonal practices that come with, the joking around, the pranking, the socializing, this is important because it builds that cohesive work culture. And it's that cohesive work culture that promotes workers to help one another out and to avoid and navigate those potential tensions that can be harmful for that coworker harmony, that can be harmful for the business as a whole. To conclude today's presentation, we can look at what we've gone through so far in reference to the book report. So what I'll do is focus on the construction of reality, the structure and agency, and the directional focus of the framework today. And then during the next presentation, I'll turn our attention to the other parts of the book report as well. So overall, when looking at that construction of reality, again, the question is, what is that driving force in the framework that produces the action? And so the action we're looking at here is that creation of order that makes the restaurant functional. And so when looking at how order is being created as our action, that driving force is following that legacy that we talked about of the American social thought, specifically kind of looking at how we're trying to manage different forms of tension. So the social tension, and that if that's created, then again, that's very dysfunctional for the restaurant when people are not doing their jobs, people are not um, helping out one another, and then also kind of managing that psychological tension. So when people are overwhelmed, when people are upset, you try to do your best to make them feel better, to let them kind of get what they need to get off their chest. So basically, what's driving the creation for Fine of the social order in the restaurants is that you really have to manage any tensions, avoid those barriers that can be counterproductive to the overall business. So we can move to the structural forces. So today's presentation, we talked about those three types of order: the physical, social, and symbolic orders. So all the different aspects within those three orders represent structural forces that can become barriers, that can interfere with the work itself, whether it be the equipment not working properly, people not fulfilling their responsibilities properly, or people not recognizing the chain of command, people not respecting one another properly. So those are all kind of larger than the individual. Those are all structural forces that come into play in terms of how order is being created. And the agency in response to this is how we navigate those barriers, how we navigate the tensions within the physical, social, and symbolic orders. Another structural force that we talked about was that work culture, that work cohesive culture that brings people together and that creates the we over me mentality. So you do have each other's back. It's not about the money you're earning or the job title you have. It's about kind of everybody coming together and working as a whole, and how that work culture presents itself, how it's built, is you build it through the play. So again, people coming together, doing the joking around, playing around with one another. That's the agency unfolding that creates the culture as a whole. And then when we're focusing on the agency, how we respond to situations, how we are kind of playing around with one another at work, that's that micro directional focus, focusing on how we navigate situations, how we build that work culture from the bottom up. When we focus on the structures, such as the responsibilities people have, such as the chain of command or the equipment in the kitchen, then that's kind of the top-down approach, focusing on how the structural forces shape people's responses. So if you don't like the knife that you presented, then you have to respond to the knife by compromising and saying it's okay to use, or perhaps you go out and buy your own knife to use in the kitchen. So the structural forces here, the equipment, kind of force your hand, but you can respond to the situation in your own way. The top-down approach, starting that structure, ending up with the individual. And then when you're looking at the individual and the responses, responding to the structural forces, that's that bottom-up approach, the micro-directional focus. So we'll leave that there for now. And with our next presentation, we will wrap up Fine's book and talk about it more in reference to the second book report.